I get asked quite a bit about how I sharpen my knives and my tools, how I keep them in good working order in the backcountry. So I thought today I would share with you the very simple sharpening kit that I carry in my pack and how I use it to maintain my edge tools. So in my pack I carry a small repair kit, inside of which is a small sharpening stone. And this one is used primarily for my smaller bladed tools, knives, carving knives. I also carry a leather strop, two sides, one with a honing compound, one that's just plain leather. And then I also have a larger sharpening stone, a puck style stone that has two grits on it. It's got a fine grit and a coarse grit. This one's used for my axes or hatchets. Now, to carry two stones, you probably don't have to, but I prefer this fine little stone for my knives. I find it easier to work with, easier to sharpen my knives with. And this larger stone that has two grits is nice for the heavier tools for my axes and hatchets, because those tools can oftentimes get banged up fairly bad. Having the dual grit, the more coarse grit, to work out any large nicks or burrs or damaged edge before you switch to the smoother side to really polish and hone the edge. So for me, two stones and a strop is all that I carry. Taking a close look at the edge of my knife, you can see a few spots where there's light reflecting back at me right on the edge. Those little white spots along the edge, those are damaged points. Lately I've just been stropping my knife, but once you start to get actual damage like this, you need to use your stone and fix these areas. So these little white spots on the edge, those are little nicks in the steel that we need to work out with our sharpening stone. So this little pocket stone is a water stone. I prefer to carry water stones in the outdoors because with an oil stone, if you don't have oil, then you don't have a lapping fluid. Whereas with a water stone, you're pretty much always going to have a lapping fluid with you. An excellent lapping fluid actually is your saliva, but to avoid grossing anybody out, I'm just going to use river water here today. The process for sharpening is very simple. I'm going to focus on one side at a time. All I'm going to do to find the angle to begin sharpening at is lay my blade perfectly flat on the stone. I'm just going to tilt it forward until I see that edge of my knife make contact with the stone. And that's how I find my angle to sharpen at. And then all I do is I just do small circles. I know lots of guys get very specific and they count their strokes and they go back and forth and all kinds of stuff, but when it comes to sharpening, my experience is what I learned from. I started off with knives at a pretty young age, and being involved in the outdoors, hunting, trapping, camping, bushcraft, wood carving, most of those tasks, most of those activities require a good sharp knife. So I learned to sharpen a knife at a really young age, just through trial and error really. And what I like to do is focus on one side of my knife, one side of the bevel. I'm going to work a burr, work that edge until a burr forms all the way across, and I won't switch sides until that happens. I make sure I keep my stone with lots of water on it. Just keep up with my sharpening. Now with my other stone, I could definitely sharpen my knife on my puck stone or my axe stone, and vice versa. I can sharpen an axe with this stone as well. But I just prefer to use this small stone for knives and the bigger stone for axes. But this is the process, just working that edge until a burr forms. Once that happens, I'll show you what that looks like. there wasn't a whole lot of damage to this edge, so it only took a few minutes with the stone to form a burr on the opposite side. The burr is this little white line right on the edge there. Basically, it's material that's been pushed over from the opposite side, beginning to curl over the edge or form a burr, and you can feel it with your finger very easily. And that burr runs the entire length of the blade. That's what you want. You want to work that burr across the entire edge. And now what we want to do is we want to flip our knife over and sharpen the other side, or the other bevel, and work that burr back over to the first side we were sharpening on. And basically that's the whole idea behind sharpening, is you work that burr over to one side, then you work it back over to the first side, and you just kind of go back and forth until eventually that burr is going to fall off, and underneath of that burr is going to be a nice razor sharp edge. So that's why I don't count my strokes when I'm sharpening. I don't do that. I simply form that burr and then go back and forth until it's worked off, and just try to maintain my bevels at the proper angle best I can. And again, that just comes with experience. But I'd say most people will be able to pick up on it pretty quick, especially with these knives that have a larger bevel. It's very easy to get the feel for it. That's all I'm doing now, is just working that burr back over. I should probably mention that if you're holding a stone like I am, you want to be careful not to come into contact with your fingers. There's probably better ways to hold the stone, but this is just what's comfortable for me. Probably wouldn't recommend it, but for me it seems to work alright, and I haven't cut myself ever before, so just exercise caution whenever you're dealing with bladed tools. That probably goes without saying. Alright, a few more minutes on the stone. We now have a burr formed. That's the very fine black line you can see right at the edge. And that's formed across the entirety of the blade. Now you may not be able to see the burr all the time, but you can definitely feel it if you just pass your finger over the edge. You can definitely feel it grabbing. That's how you know that you've got that burr formed across the entirety of that knife blade. So now we're just going to go back and forth, working that burr from side to side, and eventually it's going to fall off. I'm hoping that I'll be able to show you guys a little bit of the burr after it's worked off, but for right now it's the same process, just going back and forth. And now that the burr is formed, it won't take very much per side to work it back over. So these next few passes are going to be pretty quick. That's all it takes to work that burr. So we'll go back to this side. So this is the finished edge. The burr came off. I was unsuccessful in capturing that, unfortunately. But we got it removed. And we now have a nice edge. You can see how rough this edge looks right now. It's got all these marks on it from the stone. But right now, this edge will shave, and it hasn't even been stropped yet, but that is the next step. Stropping this knife. So this is just after the stone. You can see that this blade will already shave. But we're going to take it one step further and hone it down a bit using the strop. Strop is just leather. One side has some honing compound on it. The other side is just straight leather for finishing. It's really simple. We just lay our knife on here so that the bevel of the edge is intact with the leather, and we just pull the knife. We don't want to push it into the leather. We want to draw this back. And all we're doing is polishing the edge. And now, after a sharpening like this, I'll usually do maybe 15-20 strokes per side, and then alternate sides back and forth until I'm happy with the edge and how it looks. If I was just doing a strop in between uses, a lot of times you don't need to sharpen your knife, you can just strop it. So when you're carving, you can give your knife a strop maybe every half hour or so. And when I do those strops, I'll just go back and forth until the edge is looking polished up again. But this is all it is, just using the leather, using a bit of the honing compound to polish the edge. And this does make a really big difference in how well the edge performs. So after a few minutes of stropping, this is what we're left with. You can see there's still lots of marks from the stone on it, but this knife is extremely sharp, I can guarantee you that. Even though it may still look like it's rough, it is absolutely screaming sharp. So that's it. That's how I sharpen my tools in the outdoors. Nothing fancy about it at all, but it works good, and the result is a good functioning edge that'll hold up well in the outdoors. Now, if this had been the hatchet I was sharpening, I would just use my bigger stone, and if it was a badly damaged edge, I would use the coarse side first until I was able to achieve that burr, and then switch down to the finer side and get a nice fine edge before stropping. But that's all my process involves. A stone, work a burr onto the edge and then work it off, finish it off by stropping, and you're left with a good sharp edge that'll be plenty sufficient around camp. That's all I got to share with you guys today. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for sticking with me. I'll be back right away with the next one. Until then, God bless and happy trails.